Magical Readathon is one of my top readathons. Last year when we went into the autumn semester, I had a vlog that picked books based on the calling that my character was doing, on the basis that if that was a real course, what books she might be picking up for her summer reading. I really felt like it was something my character would do before she headed off to school. I had great fun. This time, what I'm gonna do for this week's vlog is treat it like a summer school, that she is getting to pick maybe little snippets from classes that aren't her own to test them out to see how it's going, a bit like a job fair. So what I've done is put all of the available callings onto a spinner wheel. I'm going to generate a calling completely at random, and then I'll have to find a book on my shelf, on my TBR, that I feel like fits the vibe of that calling, the kind of book that I think might be on the curriculum for that course. I'm not exactly sure how well that showed up for you, but the calling that it picked was Lexomancer. So that's this one here. You can see that Lexomancer is all about learning and using the different languages in Aldea. So I think for this one I'm going to pick something translated. And luckily enough, I actually already have a translated book on my TBR for this month. This is part of the March Mystery Madness Readathon, and the prompt was to read a book translated from a language that's not your own. 3 Bags Full by Leonie Swann was originally published in German. It's since been translated, and it actually has a movie adaptation coming out later in this year that I'm quite interested in. So this seemed like a really good time to put this on my TBR. I've seen mixed reviews of it, and I can understand why. It's a really unusual premise, and I'm guessing it's not going to be for everyone. In this, we are following a flock of sheep, and we're seeing the murder of their farmer through their eyes and seeing the sheep try to investigate the murder. Currently, I'm sitting at chapter 5, and it has been a little bit tricky to immerse myself in the story. There is quite a chunky cast of sheep which have slightly strange names. Instead of like having a drama's persona at the start with a list of your characters, there's a sheep one. So it does list all of the sheep with a tiny little bit about them, so that's really quite good. You can refer back to it, but it is a big flock. They are sheep. There's a lot of names to keep track of, a lot of characters to keep track of that don't necessarily have massively distinctive personalities, or personalities where you can really latch on to a character trait. I think that will just take some getting through the book and it'll all fit into place. It's also a little bit tricky to follow through the mystery and the investigation because again they're sheep, and what Swann does really well is present things as a sheep would see them and how they would interpret that, and we the reader, in some places I've been able to, we the reader are able to list or hear the conversations the sheep are hearing. We're able to see the things they see, and we're able to understand what the humans are talking about. The sheep then misinterpret these conversations because they see things differently. They don't understand nuances of humans. They don't understand the names that are being used. So there's a little bit of confusion thrown through the mystery, which makes kind of navigating those suspects and who has motives and things even harder, because you're not necessarily being presented it by the sleuth in the most, digestible way possible, if that makes sense. I am enjoying it so far. It's interestingly set in Ireland, which I really hadn't expected. I think just because I knew it was written in German, I was expecting it to be set in Germany, but it's set in Ireland. It's got a very pastoral, very naturey feel to it, which totally makes sense, obviously. And it's probably quite a good one for going into spring. So I'm enjoying it, and I'll let you know how I get on by the end. 3 Bags Full was completely unique. It was a very different book than I was expecting. It definitely follows that classic mystery vibe. You can see the influence of the books that the sheep have had read to them in the way they tackle the investigation. But It's also very different because you do have to adjust your thinking to interpret what the sheep are seeing, because they're misinterpreting it because they're sheep. Personally, I wouldn't say that I enjoyed the book. I was interested. I had a good time in that sense. I was intrigued. I wanted to know where we were going, and I can really, you know, appreciate and really admire how clever Leonie Swann has been at really creating a story that does feel like the POV is coming from animals, specifically herd animals and quite docile herd animals. All of it is a masterpiece of writing, and you can appreciate the thought processes that the different sheep have. And some of them, even within that flock, they have different experiences, so different ways of looking at things. Some are slightly more forward than others. Some have had experience outside of the flock and are then using that in what way they can to interpret events a little bit differently. I think it'll be a really interesting film adaptation. Maybe this is one that I might think over more. It might be one that I come back to several months still mulling over and I actually am interested in the second one. But for the moment, I think this was a full experience. I don't feel like I need a sequel. Even if I'd loved it, it's a complete story in its own right. I don't think it needs that sequel. Although I have heard that it's equally smart, and it shakes things up a bit by where this one has quite a golden age mystery tone to it. In the sequel, I think the sheep have had a different type of book read to them. I think they've been reading Silence of the Lambs, and so that book actually goes down a more thriller, tiptoeing into horror vibe, which I think is a genius idea for a series, that you could potentially play through lots of different genres because the sheep are being influenced by what's being read to them. I think that's so smart. And maybe a notion will take me, because I do think this was just, it was so different and so unusual. And yeah, I think I'm talking myself around into perhaps reading the sequel, maybe. It can definitely go on my list. I don't read enough translated books as it is. I don't know that I've ever read anything that started out in German, so that might be something I'll keep on a potential purchase list, a potential library list for when no doubt some similar prompt comes up and I would have it there. But I definitely wouldn't jump into it right away. Definitely a worthwhile book, one to try if you want to see something new, see something different, try a completely unique approach to mystery, but one that just didn't spark joy for me. It was a close call, but you can see that wild form druids specialise in protecting nature and gathering information to enrich our knowledge of species and places. So I'm thinking that something with either an animal on the cover or maybe an animal in the title might work well for this one. I might also consider some kind of mystery, perhaps a cozy, where the sleuth has an animal companion. For Wild Beast Druid, it seemed like the perfect choice was something with an animal on the cover or an animal in the title. And one of my most anticipated, most hyped, most rainy day books of 2025 happens to have both. There was also that element of almost investigation in the calling description, and I thought that this fantasy mystery, The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson, would be the perfect fit. Now, I am currently just over the 25% mark. It is a chunker of a book, so I feel like I've been reading it for quite some time. I feel like so much has happened, and yet we're still really just in that kind of opening salvo. It's very early in the year to say that I think maybe I found one of my favourite books of the year, and I'm only 25%, and I know that's very, very early to call it, but this is amazing. The basic premise of the book, I guess, is that the Emperor is reaching the end of his 24-year term. And so this magical kingdom that we're in is holding a contest to elect the next Emperor or the next Empress, the next ruler. Basically, there are 8 kind of They're not districts and they're not families, they are, I guess, sects maybe, that make up the noble classes in this kingdom. Each of them have a patron animal god and try to emulate the characteristics of that animal. So the ravens are very scholarly, they're very interested in the law, they're very much about that kind of academics. On the night before the contest begins, the island is sealed off, so we only have the competitors and the nobility, and the raven candidate is found murdered. This is where our Raven Scholar enters, and honestly so much has happened before we even get to that point. Hodgson has set up such a rich world and such a rich tapestry to play this story out on that, yes, as I said, it's a really long book, but for one of the first times in a long time, I genuinely feel like every single page has been worthwhile. The first character that we meet in the book, the character that I personally thought was the protagonist because I went into this as blind as possible, we were with for a good number of chapters. We really got to know that character, we got to really feel for them, and then everything was turned on its head. Well, so far it hasn't felt like something that is directly related to the plot. It's very much laying a level of depth and a level of intrigue and interest and history to build a story upon, and I think that's what feels important to me here with that long word count and maybe a slightly slower pace. It feels like Hodgson isn't in a hurry. She's not getting through the story as quickly as possible, keeping people's attention by being short and snappy. She has this confidence to her writing where, yes, you're hooked. I'm so invested when I've been reading this. I've not been tempted to pick up my phone or do anything else. I've been completely invested. But there's a kind of confidence to not whistling through the plots, not trimming off chapters that maybe aren't completely necessary in the moment. There's just this confidence of we'll get there when we get there, and all of the intrigue, all of the background, all of the world building, the character building, the snippets of history, the style of storytelling, all of that is giving you depth to the actual action and the, I guess, immediate plot. And I'm having such a good time with it. Such a good time with it. I still have a lot to read, so I will obviously be coming back to update you again, but I genuinely think this might be one of the best books of the year. I know it's March, but I definitely think I've found a contender for the best book of the year. When I last checked in with you on the Raven Scholar, I was pretty convinced that it was going to be a hit. But honestly, it blew my mind. The twists and turns in this were impeccable, and I loved the way Hodgson was able to not only bluff, but double bluff and make me feel like I was so clever. I was like, oh, I see the twist. That's a good one. And then she delivered that twist, and then later twisted it again in a way that if it had just been the twists, I actually might have been annoyed. But when you looked back at all the details, she had laid the groundwork for each one at the moment it came. It was completely believable. There was none of this, the detective or, you know, the characters, the writer knew something that the reader didn't. All of the hints were there, you just weren't seeing them from the right angle. There were moments where I had a suspicion about something. We would go along, I'd be like, oh, that doesn't work. And then by the end I was like, no, it does, but I wasn't fully aware. I was kind of looking at it like through fractured glass, and actually I was right, but I was wrong, but I was right. And it's just so immaculately plotted, so immaculately kind of conceived. This is one that I really think on reread you'd be able to get so much out of, because yes, the book does play a lot with prophecy and with fate, and I think some fantasy novels that can feel like a cop-out when we have prophecies and then you take that twist of, oh, the prophecy was wrong, or oh, prophecies can be changed. In this one, the prophecies are not changed. The characters might think they have changed something, but ultimately it all kind of comes back around, it rights itself. It's really hard to explain without giving too many details away, but I just thought it was so clever how she made sure that everything played out the way it was meant to, while not being at all what you had thought that would be, or what even the characters thought that would be. And there's so much to say here obviously, like I said, about free will and fate. There's a lot of things happening here that can lead you down either path. But there's also a lot of really interesting stuff done with, I want to say, like religion and education and social standing in regards to these groups. They're not districts, they're not families, but these animal sects within the nobility. There was a lot of talk about education reform. Should people like our protagonists, Nima and Cain, who have come up from the slums, they have come up from the common folk, do they have as much right as anyone else? If they can, if they have the ability, should they be allowed into this elite world? There's a lot to be said about that social kind of movement, social structure, education, expanding education universally. That was all really important. I also thought it was interesting the idea that people are divided by these animalistic kind of like personality traits. We've seen it done before. We've seen it in Divergent, in Harry Potter. We see it a little bit, I guess, in things like Percy Jackson. Maybe not so much in the Hunger Games. It's the areas, at least the personalities of the people can be what they are. But in this we do have, you know, foxes are cunning and sly. The ravens tend towards law and order. They're scholars. The oxes are stable and steady and hard workers. Those kind of personality traits. But I liked that Hodgson was able to give an element of depth to that, in that, for instance, yes, Nima by her personality suits being a raven. She's very black and white, you know, straight as an arrow, law and order type of person. But even when these people become part of these groups, they are choosing which group they become part of. It is not a sorting hat situation. It's decided for you. You get to pick which animal god you think you align most with. But then even within that, it's about trying to exemplify that god's traits, learning and training to have those kind of skills that that god would want. It's not something necessarily innate. People are then spending the rest of their lives trying to work towards the ideals of that group. So I really like that there was an element of personality, but it wasn't completely set in stone. There was still some free choice there and some ability for these people to have their own quirks, to be succeeding or failing at different rates in their path towards achieving their goals and their god's ideals. I also like that the way the religion was treated in this. Yes, we have a book where these 12 animal gods are real and they are influencing their followers. They are potentially going to destroy the world. All of that we know as the reader, but we did have some characters in here who were not believers. Nima and Cain, they buy into the 12 as a cultural touchstone. They obviously have picked their animal patrons, they worship, but they also don't really believe. And I think that was critical. Yes, the reader obviously knows that the raven and the fox are real gods that are impacting the world, and we do see that become more relevant as the book goes on. But at first, despite the fact they've dedicated their lives to these gods, Nima and Cain don't actually believe that these gods are, you know, they don't believe they're walking amongst the people. They believe in them as a kind of abstract concept, and are still really, really surprised to find that they're more tangible than that. And I thought that was a really interesting take too, that difference between religion and belief and religion as more of a cultural touchstone. The way you can kind of think of yourself as being of a religion while not actually maybe believing, but it's the way you grew up. There was a lot of different nuance there, and I think again that's something that would be really interesting to maybe reread. I know there's a sequel for this. I'm hoping it's coming out this year. It says it is, but there's not that much information. And I think that when it does come out, I would be really excited to dive back in to reread this one from start to finish before going on to that book. Star Whisperer. Nobody believed me at the start when I said they whisper back, but I proved them wrong time and time again. The key traits of Star Whisperers are dreamy, imaginative, and attentive. The cosmos speaks to us all, but it takes true skill and insight to listen back. Star Whisperers are mages who act as receivers of celestial messages. They master the craft of tuning out the world, calming the mind, and listening to the messages from the stars. These messages are sent every day, but collecting them is only the first step of this calling. So Star Whisperer was a little bit trickier to find something that really called to me, that even just as a prompt. And then I spotted the Incandescent on NetGalley. This has been on my vague TBR for a long time. It sounded like the kind of book I would really love. So I thought, there's stars on the cover, the Star Whisperer, and this is what we went for. The Incandescent is the magical school trope, but told from the point of view of the staff that are running the school. It's a much more day-to-day life, the humdrum nature of academia, but just in a magical school setting. That also means obviously it's not middle grade or YA, this is an adult novel. And I've been really enjoying it. I always quite like fantasy that deals with the administrative side of running your kingdom, your fantasy world. I love books that delve into what can be quite mundane. I think I like the idea of there being that necessary step, bureaucracy, even in a fantastical setting. I'm thinking of things like The Goblin Emperor or In the Hands of the Emperor, books like Queen of Coin and Whispers, where we have someone running the country's taxes. In this one, we're following one of the school's kind of higher academics. She's not the headmistress, but she is quite up there, and she works primarily at the moment with the A-level magic students. So the 4 in her class, and they are all in that 17-year-old age bracket. And at the moment she's teaching them about demon summonings. The day-to-day aspect of the story is a lot of fun. We get to see her sitting in to assess another teacher's teaching style. We get to see her dealing with the imp that is possessing the staff room photocopier. We get to see her dealing with the wardens, who are magical security guards on campus, as well as navigating the interpersonal politics of the magic side of the school and the mundane side of the school, the teachers that don't have magic and are teaching things like English and maths. And I guess there's maybe a slightly different power dynamic or hierarchy when those two sides of the school have to interact. Half the fun is seeing that in this magical world where you have powers, it's the minutiae of the rules, and there's still being rules that I really enjoy. I've kind of been hoarding this one, but I think this is the right moment to read it. It definitely fits in, much like The Raven Scholar, which maybe wasn't quite as academic as I thought it would be. This one definitely fits in with that leading up to Orilium, leading up to going to a magical school readathon idea. It's probably the perfect book to finish this vlog on and segue into my actual reading for the readathon. The Incandescent definitely isn't going to be for everyone, but I actually had a great time with it. I loved that magic school in a very grounded world. It felt very realistic. It felt something that could exist in our world because it was so detail orientated. I loved getting to see a magical school in the sense of how a magical school would actually work, how it would run, the board of governors, lessons plans, staff interpersonal conflicts, rather than a magical school that is simply the backdrop for young characters having adventures, and adventures that by and large are really unrelated to the school itself. I liked seeing that kind of almost, I guess, boring, mundane, humdrum routine of academic life, but with the added threats and the added complications of not only teaching children maths and English, but teaching them to deal with threats such as demons and incantations. Again, I know it's not going to be for everyone. I have read the reviews. I completely understand that this doesn't have a lot of magical, fantastical elements to it. And if you're looking for something in your fantasy that has that escapist element, this probably isn't going to do that. This comes closer to being a contemporary about a teacher than it does something that's full of really magical elements. So it's definitely not for everyone, but I thought it was really refreshing. I loved Safi as a character. I loved that she was 38. She's definitely in that kind of upper age bracket that we don't tend to see protagonists in. I liked that she was very settled in her life. She had achieved goals and she was in a really well-paying, well-respected job. And while she wasn't in a relationship at the start of the book, she wasn't sad about that. She wasn't looking for that. And I thought it was really nice to see a mature woman, not necessarily struggling. We see so many books where they are where that middle-age kind of category, they're struggling to achieve these goals that they've left themselves, or looking back on her life with major regrets. Admittedly, Safi does have that one big major regret about her school years and her magical past, but as a rule, she's fairly happy with her life. It's not exciting, but she doesn't mind that. And I liked seeing a character that didn't mind that their life wasn't full of big events, it wasn't full of bells and whistles, that they were just quite happy and settled in what they had with a kind of homebody contentment. It was unusual in a protagonist, and I really liked that. In some ways, she reminded me of the typical T. Kingfisher protagonists, who tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more world-weary and practical, and although they still have goals for their own lives, they're maybe not as extravagant and more relatable than the kind of goals that we would see in an 18-year-old in this type of world. That said, although I did really enjoy it, I can see some flaws. The pacing at a few points really dipped, it slowed down. There were a couple of plot elements that I sort of felt fell by the wayside, especially as we went into the final act. And it does make sense. Safi as a character, the character we then see in the finale and the ending, is concerned with the things that matter to her. She's not kind of poking her nose into things that no longer concern her, but as the reader, I would have liked to have known what happened more with that storyline. I guess this is a choice of character versus plot, and it'll depend how you personally feel on it. It does make sense more for Safi to be moving on and not to be tying herself in knots over what has already occurred, but personally I would maybe just have liked to have heard a bit more about how it was resolved. I've had a really good time with this vlog. The books I picked really fit for the callings I chose them for, and that I was lucky enough to be able to fit books I was already really excited about into those callings. 3 Bags Full didn't work out for me the way I'd hoped it would, but though I didn't necessarily enjoy it, I can definitely see something really unique and clever that Leonie Swann has managed to do. And I'm really excited now to see the adaptation of it when it comes out, to see how it's tackled on the screen. The Raven Scholar was by and large the absolute winner of this vlog. This is one that I had heard of vaguely, I'd seen it around Booktube, but I hadn't really thought it was for me. I think I had got caught up in the idea of it being dark academia, which isn't my thing, and probably just from that scholar word in the title. But I was blown away. I loved that book. It is probably going to stay in my top books of the year. I'm very much anticipating the sequel for it, and I'll be keeping my eye out, hopefully, to grab it as soon as I'm able. If you've read any of the books in this vlog, or if you have any thoughts about them, please do let me know those in the comments. Also, let me know if you are doing Orilium, Magical Readathon, what is your calling? And if you had to pick a book to sum up your calling, the way I've done in this video, which book would it be? Otherwise, just leave me some kind of school adjacent emoji, and I hope I'm going to see you in the next video.